Good afternoon, I'm Dennis Vitorian, and this is the 25th hour, helping you remember everything that happened beyond the 24/7 news cycle. Now, in this week's news for the week of January 24th to 30th, 2021, Blasio promised help is on the way in his State of the City address. Cuomo finally has to face the music as he releases his figures on nursing home deaths. Biden's wrist hasn't fallen off yet with the amount of executive orders he signed undoing Trump's work, and Congress is gearing up for a second impeachment trial while dealing with the crazies within their ranks. Things may have changed by the time you hear this. Starting with Blasio. The city currently has logged almost 600,000 cases of COVID and almost 27,000 deaths. New York City received an additional 100,000 vaccine doses on Tuesday, a drop in the bucket since the city has been inoculating up to 40,000 people a day. The city had to shut down 15 vaccination centers for the time being because of the low vaccine supply, including Yankee Stadium and Citi Field. The Association for a Better New York polled 1,549 New York City residents and found that while most say they'll take the vaccine, a significant 42% are hesitating to take it, including minority groups, with a huge chunk of that group waiting until someone they know takes the vaccine. Most city nursing home staff is skipping the vaccine, with only 40% of them being vaccinated. There isn't one clear reason why those staff aren't getting vaccinated, with some pointing to a minority workforce skeptical of accepting vaccines, or vaccine misinformation, or a general wait-and-see approach. The city has failed to produce up-to-date information highlighting the stark racial disparities about who's receiving the vaccine, with data from before the new year showing that 5% of those inoculated are Black and Latino Americans. 18,000 doses removed from nursing home vaccinations to the general vaccine supply chain. The governor announced that city restaurants can begin reopening next month at 25% capacity, more than a month after he originally closed them to stem the tide of the pandemic. Daniel Presti, one of the owners of Staten Island's Max Public House, which was the scene of an anti-COVID regulation protest, won't be prosecuted for driving his car into a police officer after a grand jury indicted him on 2 counts of misdemeanor charges of selling alcohol without a license, but not for felony second-degree assault, reckless endangerment, or reckless driving. De Blasio's office condemned the lack of prosecution as a miscarriage of justice, and the bar is currently closed itself. Lawyers for 8 Rikers inmates cited the fact that the Department of Corrections hasn't met its goal of staying at 50% capacity, citing the failure of the policy for a reason why the inmates should get vaccinated. 87 Rikers inmates are currently sick with coronavirus. In an email written to Dr. Anthony Fauci, the city's head of the Department of Health and Mental Hygiene's Bureau of Communicable Diseases, criticized New York City's contact tracing program, requesting that grants from the federal government stop being tied to test and trace programs, since New York City's own program isn't doing so well in effectively finding other cases. There's a serious drop in enrollment in city public schools, with 43,000 dropped at the start of this year, a 4% decrease, but a 9% decrease particularly in kindergarten enrollment. Mayor de Blasio said on an appearance on MSNBC that he wants schools to reopen with full strength by September, countering words by the teachers union's head Michael Mulgrew, who doesn't want schools open until every teacher is vaccinated. 7 of the top mayoral candidates said in a Council of School Supervisors and Administrators forum that none of them would keep schools chancellor Richard Carranza. Carranza was hired by de Blasio in 2018 and was a former superintendent in San Francisco and Austin, Texas. As we mentioned a bit later, a federal judge ordered a special master to oversee New York City's special education complaint process. 1,000 students at Columbia University are withholding their tuition, saying that the price in tuition and the amount of financial aid that they're receiving aren't justified during the pandemic. The panel of educational policy voted 8-7 to stop the in-person examination of the gifted and talented test this summer. The program involves kids as young as 4 testing into a narrow accelerated education program, and this is supposed to be the last test administered in the program this summer. One person wasn't happy about the vote. In particular, Staten Island Borough President James Otto fired his appointee to the panel, Peter Calandrella, after he voted against holding the in-person test, and after telling Otto that he was actually planning to vote in favor of it. The Housing Rights Initiative announced 3 new lawsuits against landlords this week, saying that the city loses $1.5 billion every year due to tax abatements for rent-stabilized buildings, including 1,500 landlords that aren't complying with the rent stabilization laws. The landlords allegedly own 3 buildings and overcharged tenants approximately $10 million in total. The lawsuits are supported by Queens lawmakers, including Senate Deputy Leader Michael Gianaris, Assemblyman Zora Mamdani, and Councilman Costa Kansensanides, with some lawmakers saying this is the end of the 421A tax abatement program, which gives developers tax breaks for rent stabilizing 100% of a new multifamily rental development. A New York One investigation revealed that housing vouchers for homeless people are routinely denied by landlords, which is considered illegal discrimination. The city FHEPS voucher program was created in late 2018 so that homeless people can gain apartments and stay off the streets, issuing eligibility letters to recipients to show landlords. But out of 4,118 families, only 178 of them found an apartment every month. Reflecting a new reality within the ranked choice voting system in New York, Bronx State Senator Gustavo Rivera endorsed Scott Stringer and Diane Morales as his first and second choice for mayor, respectively.
My number one choice for mayor is Scott Stringer. Now, Scott is our current, yes, you can actually applaud for that, yes. I'm proud to say my second choice is, let me see, Diane Morales.
Court records show that Andrew Yang won attorney's fees from a lawsuit that was paid for by taxpayers. Back when the State Board of Elections planned to cancel the Democratic primary due to COVID in April, Yang sued and won, winning attorney's fees as part of the court ruling in his favor, with taxpayers dishing out $220,000. Yang also said that if the gifted and talented tests weren't restored, families would leave New York City over it. Campaign volunteers from Yang's staff are also saying they're being forced to sign NDAs, legal contracts that make the signer agree to not divulge non-public information and acknowledge possible legal repercussions of doing so, something Yang said he wanted to get rid of when he was running for president. Meanwhile, Obama's former OMB director, Sean Donovan, has hired members of Biden's former campaign team, including Brendan McPhillips, former Pennsylvania director of Biden's campaign, to be Donovan's new campaign manager. After reporting showed mayoral candidate and Wall Street executive Ray McGuire's connections to the conservative Koch brothers, it turns out that McGuire also represented a Saudi Arabian petrochemical company more than a decade ago. The first candidate to drop out of the mayor's race is Zach Iscol, a former Marine, who will now set his sights on the comptroller's race instead. One of the next mayoral forums will be moderated by one of the homeless residents of the Lucerne Hotel, which has been in the spotlight of the Upper West Side's battle to keep homeless people out of its neighborhood. The homeless hero is partnering with the Upper West Side Open Hearts Initiative for the forum on February 4th. The City Board of Election announced that if nobody gets a majority in the special election to replace outgoing Councilman Rory Lansman, they're going to have to hand count the results because they're still waiting for approval for their tabulation software from the State Board of Elections. The State Board later agreed to help the city certify ranked choice voting tabulation software according to an email sent to the City Board signed by the executive directors Todd Valentine and Robert Brehm. Real Housewives of New York City reality star Barbara Kavavit has thrown her hat into the mayoral race. Manhattan DA candidate Eliza Orlins has released a sex worker policy plank with the goal to fully decriminalize sex work. 3 council candidates joined together to cross-endorse each other, just like Senator Rivera endorsed Stringer and Morales for mayor. Manny Silva, Nancy Martinez, and the Reverend Sherwin James numbered each other seconds, thirds, and fourths in the open seat election to replace Donovan Richards. A Queens Daily Eagle investigation revealed that despite Latinos making up 2/3 of the population covered by Community Board 3, only a quarter of the board are Latinos themselves. Numerous members of the Brooklyn Democratic Party and mayoral hopefuls are boycotting an upcoming mayoral election forum hosted by the Brooklyn Democratic Party and moderated by journalist Errol Lewis over anti-Chinese comments made by District Leader Lori Maslow, who tweeted that she couldn't even look at Chinese food in response to a New York Times Chinese tariff story. Maslow resigned her 6th vice chair position, but it's largely ceremonial. Mayoral candidate Andrew Yang, Scott Stringer, Carlos Menchaca, and Diane Morales refused to take part in the forum until Maslow leaves entirely, while Brooklyn Dems Party chairwoman, Assemblywoman Rodney's Bashat, called boycotting members opportunists and defended Maslow's constituents' rights to choose their own representative. Maslow actually ended up resigning her seat this week, officially letting people know on Twitter and comparing the boycott against her to right-wing Trump supporters. Brooklyn DA Eric Gonzalez vacated almost 300 warrants connected to prostitution in order to avoid unnecessary arrests against sex workers, since his office rarely prosecutes those crimes anyway. The Real Estate Board of New York released a report that the number of the city's new construction projects decreased by 28%, the lowest since 2012. Opponents of a $1 billion project to rebuild Lenox Hill Hospital on the Upper East Side said it would ruin the character of the community. The new 26-story building with 475 beds would be catered to wealthier patients, the community activists say. The Union Square Partnership, which announced last week that it's launching a $100 million vision plan to add 2 acres to Manhattan's Union Square, is facing a challenge concerning the accessibility of its 4, 5, and 6 train lines, which don't have elevators that go down to the platforms. A Siena College survey commissioned by Transportation Alternatives revealed that 68% of registered New York City voters support adding more protected bike lanes, and 63% want to expand the Open Streets program, all in exchange for sacrificing free parking in order to get it. The mayor in his State of the City address said that the city plans to ban fossil fuel connections and new construction operations by 2030 entirely.
We need to make clear that New York City will renounce fossil fuels fully, and therefore we need to ban fossil fuel connections in the city by the end of this decade, literally ensuring that our only choice is renewable energy.
4 months after Mayor de Blasio announced an economic reform agenda to get New York City out of the COVID budget hole that it's in, the Gotham Gazette reports that nothing of substance materialized. Although the mayor sent out 12 press releases, the policies in those releases dealt with continued regulations concerning outside dining, for example, and not any new initiatives announced by the mayor 4 months ago. The mayor's office told Gotham Gazette that the mayor plans to address economic policies in his State of the City speech, which he held this week. Speaking of the restaurant industry in New York City, most will be familiar with the high cost of running a restaurant in the COVID era, but the Gotham has reported that it's expensive just to close a restaurant, especially during this time. Eateries have to face their creditors, the article says, as business owners have to settle with landlords, banks, and loaners, catering companies that kept deposits, and possible lawsuits from creditors seeking to get a place in line to recover debts and possible bankruptcy. De Blasio finally gave the State of the City address that we just mentioned, announcing how he plans to get the city out of the pandemic budget crunch it's in, with the theme being a recovery for all of us. De Blasio said he would create a city cleanup corps with 10,000 workers to beautify the city as long as the federal government comes through.
We will bring our city back in so many ways that you will see and feel. And one of them is we'll create a cleaner city. We'll hire 10,000 New Yorkers using stimulus funds Borrowing from one of the greatest initiatives of the New Deal, New York City's own Franklin Delano Roosevelt created the Civilian Conservation Corps, and we'll update that idea. The City Cleanup Corps will wipe away graffiti, power wash sidewalks, create community murals, tend to community gardens, beautify public spaces, and work with community organizations to clean their neighborhoods.
De Blasio also said he would give small businesses a $50 million recovery tax credit and a $100 million recovery loan program. 2,000 small businesses would get $100,000 loans with low interest. Mayor de Blasio and Comptroller and mayoral hopeful Scott Stringer announced that a couple of city employee retirement accounts will divest $4 billion from the fossil fuel industry. City pension systems are buoyed by investing in financial securities, with a push lately to get out of supporting fossil fuel companies to combat climate change. The mayor did not name the companies being divested from. A 2017 plan to make East Harlem more resilient to climate change that cost $1 million still hasn't been released, and it's not clear what's in the plan beyond a 25-page summary released by the Department of Parks and Recreation. As if the New York Post wants the MTA to raise the fare, they covered MTA Chairman Pat Foy's testimony to the state Senate that not raising the fares is costing the MTA $5 million every month. The MTA decided last week to delay a fare hike on buses and subways. In de Blasio State of the City address, he announced that the Brooklyn and Queensboro bridges would get bike lanes on the road, a big change from the current pedestrian paths that are forced to share bike lanes along with constantly injured pedestrians.
For the Brooklyn Bridge and the Queensboro Bridge, we'll create new two-way protected bike lanes. We'll have space on the bridges devoted solely to clean transportation. And we'll create new bike boulevards in every borough, designed to give bicycles travel priority and put cyclist safety first.
The MTA's Inspector General also chided the MTA for not doing enough to curb its overtime abuse, with Carolyn Pokorny said her recommendations on how to stop overpaying employees still hasn't been adopted more than a year after she advised the agency. New York police officer Carmine Simpson was arrested on child pornography charges stemming from allegations he pretended to be 17 years old and obtained sexually explicit photos and videos from at least 46 minors. In order to urge officers to step in when their colleagues are taking part in misconduct, the NYPD enrolled in the Active Bystandership for Law Enforcement project hosted by Georgetown University's Law Center. More than 70 other police departments enrolled in the program. An unidentified police officer that was recorded putting their knee against the neck of Sir Carlisle Arnold at the beginning of this month has been put on modified duty pending an investigation, de Blasio announced. Arnold was arrested for driving an ATV down Sutphin Boulevard in Queens in what was called a memorial drive for a deceased friend. A member of the Civilian Complaint Review Board is protesting the group's agreement to accept the new discipline matrix touted by the mayor and the NYPD. City Council appointee Mayor Stolly Budd said the penalties sent out by the matrix are meaningless and that the board is just swallowing whatever the NYPD is giving them. The other 14 voting members of the CCRB adopted the matrix anyway, with Chairman Fred Davis saying the matrix was just the first step. The NYPD made the claim that 311 calls about quality of life issues such as public drunkenness, drug abuse, and loud noise are correlated to increased shootings around the city, since the chances of a gun crime occur 6 hours after those 311 calls, according to the police department. Moving on to the city council. A bill by Councilwoman Margaret Chin that increases the number of permits for street vendors was passed this week, marking the end of a 2-year wait by sidewalk and street sellers. The bill makes 3,000 permits from this year official, while creating an additional 4,000 permits by 2022. 18 council candidates are holding events throughout the city and in their districts attempting to inform voters about the new ranked choice voting system whereby someone picks their top 5 choices for office. One candidate has to get over 50% to win, but if not, the person in last place in most people's ballots gets knocked off, and their votes go to the person with the individual voter's second place pick until the candidate eventually reaches over 50%. The Madison Square Garden PAC, created by Knicks and Mets owner James Dolan, who also owns Madison Square Garden, has donated to some local candidates with the goal to favorably approve regulations for the arena. Council members Justin Brandon, Alika Ampry-Samuel, Adrian Adams, Robert Holden, Francisco Moya, and Diana Ayala were each given $1,000 according to campaign finance records. Moving on to Cuomo. The state has logged around 1.4 million COVID cases and almost 43,000 deaths. After months of not revealing the death toll of nursing home residents that ended up dying once they were sent to the hospital with COVID, Attorney General Letitia James revealed those figures, showing that the death toll was undercounted by 50%. Whereas the earlier death count had around 8,200 deaths, it's now up to more than 12,000. After the numbers are released, Cuomo and his administration still say they weren't misrepresenting the numbers, and the governor only claims he authorized the release of the figures because nursing home deaths were being used as political football.
Where this starts is frankly, a political attack from prior federal administration, HHS. Their great spokesperson, Michael Caputo, who's Roger Stone protege, who said we had more nursing home deaths in New York because of something that the state health department did. This report affirms everything the commissioner said for the past year. The State Department of Health followed federal guidance by CMS and CDC commissioner said no not-for-profit nursing home was forced to take anyone. Report confirms that. If they took a person who they could not care for, a COVID-positive person, they violated the law. The report says that. And the Department of Health only counted the number of deaths in hospitals and the number of deaths in nursing homes. Released that number. That number stays the same. Well, how about people who were transferred from a hospital back to a nursing home? That number, the department was correlating, because you have to get that from the nursing homes. And the report also says the information from nursing homes is often incorrect. And that's the number to date. But it's an ongoing process.
Biden's press secretary was asked about possible impropriety regarding the nursing home numbers, but Jen Psaki said that any federal investigation would be handled by the Department of Justice. New York is going to get a 16% increased supply of vaccines, but the governor said that the rollout will still take about 6 to 9 months. FEMA is reimbursing New York $934 million for vaccine administration. Cuomo urged churchgoers to get vaccinated in pre-recorded remarks in Rochester, Syracuse, and Brooklyn in a strategy to get more black New Yorkers vaccinated as the African-American community stays skeptical. The governor announced in a press conference that 72% of the state's healthcare workers have become vaccinated and that the state vaccine supply is week to week. One bit of good news is that as the state's cases begin to go down, Cuomo said the state's economic valve can be adjusted, or in other words, that things can begin to open up. While Rikers prisoners fight for their place in line to get vaccinated, the state's prisoners are fighting to not get sick with COVID themselves, with 5,100 currently being sick and 12 having died in recent days, according to the New York Times. Cuomo said that Yankee Stadium will still serve as a COVID vaccination site for the Bronx. Ray Donovan, the agent in charge at the New York division of the DEA, said that the pandemic has exacerbated the state's opioid epidemic with a 214% increase in meth seized in New York from 2019 and a 59% increase in fentanyl seized over the same period. Cuomo might get his first bicameral veto in 3 terms if he doesn't compromise his tax proposals with the state legislature. The Wall Street Journal reported how Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart Cousins would seek a tax increase regardless of whether the federal government comes to the state's rescue. Aides to the governor have told the Wall Street Journal that Cuomo is planning to propose a tax on Airbnb stays. It's not clear what the sales tax would be, but local counties are allowed to charge their own sales taxes on top of the state's. Meanwhile, Mount Vernon Mayor Patterson Howard has requested the state to oversee the city's finances in response to allegations of misconduct by Mount Vernon Comptroller Deborah Reynolds by failing to be transparent about Mount Vernon's finances. The New York State Education Commissioner Betty Rosa has requested a series of federal waivers from the Biden administration in order to not test students for the current school year because of the pandemic, with the waivers up for public comment now. A report released by the Office of State Comptroller Thomas DiNapoli showed that 31 school districts around the state are facing fiscal stress. Despite many schools only hosting remote classes at SUNY Oneonta, they'll host in-person classes for the first time in a while because of backlash from students, parents, and even the staff. Despite the Buffalo Teachers Union filing a lawsuit, schools are going to go ahead and reopen in the upstate New York County. Teachers are bringing concerns of health and safety in Buffalo public schools, saying in court papers that there's a high risk of bodily harm, injury, and the potential loss of life that union members could suffer from getting COVID. The Long Island Railroad said that a 10% service cut goes into effect on Monday, affecting peak travel times for service between New York City and Babylon, Far Rockaway, Hempstead, Huntington, Long Beach, Oyster Bay, Port Washington, and Ronkonkoma. New York Senator and new Majority Leader Chuck Schumer expressed confidence about the Hudson River Tunnel project and congestion pricing, saying it'll move to the top of Biden's infrastructure priorities at the start of the session. The Port Authority plans to object to $105 million in costs connected to the replacement of the Goethals Bridge. Work on the Goethals replacement was done 3 years ago, and the third-party arbitration board came up with the final price. New York State plans to honor Native American tribes on I-87 after originally ignoring requests by the Stockbridge, Muncie, St. Regis, Mohawk, and the Delaware tribes to install large-scale murals celebrating the tribe's history. The state built a new ramp project on I-87 over land the 3 tribes hold sacred. A barge at the Gowanus Canal Superfund site has sunk. The EPA said that the barge contained dredged material from the bottom of the Gowanus and is investigating the incident. The governor's office announced that state parks saw a record 78 million visits last year, a 34% increase over the last decade. Contract troubles continue between the Long Island Power Authority and PSEG, with the LIPA sending them a new list of demands to address PSEG's management of the electrical grid. Buffalo Police Commissioner Byron Lockwood announced at a Common Council Police Oversight Committee meeting that Buffalo's officers will be required to wear their name badges on their uniforms, a reversal of current policy except in cases of protests and civil unrest, although a badge number will be displayed at all times. Meanwhile, in Rochester, New York, a police accountability board gave its own recommendations that included the end of chokeholds, no-knock warrants, and a $10 million budget to fund alternative first responder systems. Moving on to Albany. Brooklyn State Senator Andrew Gennardis and Staten Island Assemblyman Charles Fall introduced a bill this week that would allow workers to get paid time off work to get vaccinated, taking away a possible obstacle for those who have to deal with last-minute appointments made available at the scant amount of vaccination sites. A number of proposals sponsored by Republican State Senator George Borrello seek to assist restaurants in the state with a number of issues, including taxes, layoffs, and delivery app fees. The bills revealed by state Republicans would give small businesses more time to pay sales, payroll, and property taxes. Democratic state lawmakers, Senator Neil Breslin and Assembly members Patricia Fahey, John McDonald, and Carrie Warner sent a letter to Cuomo urging the governor to reprioritize who gets the vaccine after reporting revealing that disabled New Yorkers are being pushed aside in the state's vaccination push. Activists are trying to get rid of Senator Brian Benjamin as chair of the Budget and Revenue Committee, saying that his stock holdings and board positions disqualify him. State lawmakers will begin and announce tours of upstate prisons in an effort to highlight serious disparities in how the state is treating prisoners amidst the pandemic, as part of a push to advocate a Justice Roadmap legislative package, which includes alternatives to solitary confinement and weed legalization. Senator Julia Salazar and Assemblywoman Carmen De La Rosa plan on touring these prisons soon. The governor is being threatened with a lawsuit if the state doesn't change its vaccination policy for prisoners. Assemblyman N. Nick Perry plans on reviving efforts to create a state commission dedicated to investigating prosecutorial misconduct. National Registry of Exonerations data showed that wrongful convictions were historically caused by wrongdoing led by prosecutors. Moving on to the state courts, 4 former members of the Civilian Complaint Review Board are suing the Police Accountability Group in Manhattan Federal Court for alleged retaliation. J. Christopher Doerr, Winsome Thelwell, Dane Buchanan, and Nicole Napolitano are saying that they were all fired following Buchanan's authoring a memo decrying how the CCRB is rolling over NYPD refusals to provide evidence in abuse cases that involve body cam footage. A judge ruled that the city isn't obligated to house every homeless person in a hotel, which would have cost city taxpayers $76 million per month. Manhattan Supreme Court Justice Arthur Engoron said that the legal aid's claim that congregate housing shelters help spread COVID didn't justify forcing taxpayers to pay for homeless individuals to be put up in hotels. Judge Engoron also ruled in a separate case that former President Donald Trump's business has to give state investigators discovery, or documents in legal parlance, relating to a civil inquiry looking into alleged misreporting of assets to fraudulently receive loans and tax benefits. Engoron ordered the Trump Organization to produce records last December, as well as in a different case relating to whether Trump's businesses lied to get tax benefits for a property in Westchester tied to a conservation easement, which is a permission from the state in order to put in place certain environmentally friendly rules. More than 90 Buffalo area restaurants led by State Senator Patrick Gallivan have sued Governor Cuomo and Erie County Supreme Court, challenging Cuomo's executive orders that mandated that restaurants close between 10 p.m. and 5 a.m., saying there's no valid scientific rationale for the closures. Brooklyn Supreme Court Judge Catherine Levine lifted a temporary restraining order against the Gowanus rezoning on Thursday, allowing the city to continue its uniform land use review procedure. Activists said the city was trying to get around its legal obligations to hold in-person hearings as part of the rezoning process, but that the pandemic mandates the city to wait until things calm down before they move forward with any more planning. Moving on to Biden, who has been busy. According to Dr. Ann Shukot, the CDC Principal Deputy Director, President Biden is going to institute a travel ban on South Africa due to reports of a new COVID variant emerging from that country. The ban went into effect yesterday as of the time of this recording. 2 people have been discovered with the South African variant in the U.S., with pharmaceutical companies saying the vaccines on the market should still be effective against it, with Moderna actively updating its vaccine to counteract against the variant more effectively. Nearly 200 people in the U.S. have been detected as being infected with the UK variant. Meanwhile, Johnson & Johnson announced that their COVID vaccine is 85% effective against severe COVID illness, but is less effective when it comes to the new COVID variants around the globe. The company is getting ready to supply 2 million doses as soon as it's approved, according to the Government Accountability Office. Merck, another pharmaceutical company, said that it won't be producing a COVID vaccine after all because of what it calls inferior immune responses to its vaccine. On Monday, President Biden said he was now aiming to have 1.5 million Americans vaccinated daily instead of the earlier 1 million in his first 100 days. Biden also said that his administration is working on buying another 200 million doses so that the entire U.S. population is vaccinated by the end of the summer.
After review of the current vaccine supply and manufacturing plans, I can announce that we will increase overall weekly vaccination distributions to states, tribes, and territories from 8.6 million doses to a minimum of 10 million doses. Starting next week, that's an increase of 1.4 million doses per week.
Biden's COVID response coordinator, Jeff Zients, told state governors in a phone call on Tuesday that they should expect a 16% increase in dose delivery starting next week. The Pentagon may end up sending troops to help with the vaccine rollout, helping specifically with FEMA's 100 vaccine sites around the nation. In a piece published in the Journal of the American Medical Association, the CDC said that after reviewing enough scientific studies, it concluded that there has been little evidence that schools have contributed meaningfully to increased community transmission. In other words, as long as masks and social distancing were enforced, schools are okay to operate, but indoor sports won't fare as luckily, which hasn't been the main point of the headlines. A separate CDC study showed that out of 17 K-12 rural Wisconsin schools, only 7 out of the 191 COVID cases were due to indoor transmission. In new COVID briefings, Dr. Anthony Fauci, the head of the U.S. Infectious Disease Agency, said that he feels liberated now that the science can speak for itself in front of the press, as opposed to when he was being muzzled during Trump's presidency or being castigated for going against official administration doctrine.
But you said I was joking about it. I was very serious about it. I wasn't joking. No, actually, I mean, obviously, I don't want to be going back, over history, but it was very clear that there were things that were said, be it regarding things like hydroxychloroquine and other things like that, that really was uncomfortable because they were not based on scientific fact. I can tell you, I take no pleasure at all in being in a situation of contradicting the president. So it was really something that you didn't feel that you could actually say something and there wouldn't be any repercussions about it. The idea that you can get up here and talk about what you know, what the evidence, what the science is, and know that's it. Let the science speak. It is somewhat of a liberating feeling.
Dr. Deborah Birx, who fell from grace after she allegedly got together with family for Thanksgiving against her own agency's official policy and for spreading the Trump administration's lies about COVID, gave an interview to 60 Minutes talking about the difficulties of being in charge of the Trump COVID task force since there was no one working full-time to manage the former administration's COVID response, and that there were members of the administration who certainly thought COVID is a hoax.
I saw the president presenting graphs that I never made. So I know that someone out there or someone inside was creating a parallel set of data and graphics that were shown to the president.
So if the COVID response looked chaotic from the outside, Birx confirmed it was the same inside.
Every time a statement was made by a political leader that wasn't consistent with public health needs, that derailed our response.
Biden signed an executive order on Monday asking federal agencies to purchase more American-made products with the goal to increase support for American companies. The order also makes it more difficult to get waivers to buy overseas products, along with the creation of a website that can tell American businesses whether they can offer the federal government an American alternative to foreign contracts. Following the Obama administration's work to put the late abolitionist Harriet Tubman as the face of the $20 bill, replacing former president and slave owner Andrew Jackson, Trump shut the efforts down soon as he entered office. Now, Biden is picking up the effort, with Press Secretary Jen Psaki saying the Treasury Department is acting to resume the initiative. According to an analysis by Berenberg Economics, Americans saved $1.4 trillion in the first 9 months of 2020, which is expected to help kickstart the American economy as it comes out of the pandemic. Nonprofit research company Opportunity Insights claimed that it might be smarter to narrow down exactly who gets the next round of stimulus bills, pointing at data that says that those earning under $75,000 annually actually spend the money quickly after receiving it, as opposed to higher earners that hoard the stimulus funds. Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell said at a news conference after a 2-day meeting with other Federal Reserve officials that the pace of the U.S.'s economic recovery has moderated and that the Fed is keeping its policy steady. The government reported on Thursday that the U.S. economy contracted 3.5% in 2020 in total, while growing at a 4% annual rate in the final 3 months. Unemployment claims remained at a high of 847,000. There are an estimated 33 million unemployed Americans currently. After introducing his immigration bill and receiving Republican pushback, sources inside Biden's administration say that they're open to breaking up Biden's immigration proposal into separate pieces in order to quicken passage. The Department of Justice's acting Attorney General Monty Wilkinson sent a memo announcing the rescission of Trump's zero-tolerance policy for immigration offenses that led to the federal government separating thousands of migrant children from their parents. The memo stated the policy that was inconsistent with the DOJ's policy of making individualized assessments in criminal cases and helps restore prosecutorial discretion. More than 3,000 children were separated from their parents. The Trump administration was warned that the government wasn't logistically prepared to hold so many children, but moved forward anyway. Around 628 children are still separated from their parents after the Trump administration was ordered by a judge to reconcile the families, but lost track of the parents they already deported. The U.S. has also officially extended temporary residence for 7,000 Syrian refugees for 18 months and is also allowing 1,800 additional applicants for the program, according to the acting Department of Homeland Security Secretary David Pekoski. Another series of executive orders Biden signed had to do with racial equity. He directed his administration to tackle racism in the federal housing programs and end the use of private prisons, although the latter excluded immigration agencies. Biden also rolled back the Mexico City policy, which banned federal support to abortion providers, rescinded a Trump resolution called the Geneva Consensus Declaration, which called on cutting out abortion from women's rights and health, health and side with countries which are mostly harmful for women's rights, and Biden directed the DHHS to scrap the Title X rule that banned organizations from providing or referring women for abortions from receiving funds through a program that also pays for contraception and STD screenings. The president also reopened the Obamacare marketplace exchanges so that more people can sign up for health care. Funding for the site's marketing is also expected to return after the last president cut the funds meant for getting the public aware of the site's open enrollment period. Biden signed an executive order that outlined a new U.S. energy policy, including making the federal fleet run on green energy and ban oil and gas drilling on public lands, with the exception of tribal lands. Biden's new climate envoy, former Secretary of State John Kerry, announced a new climate summit in the UK in November called the Glasgow Summit and dubbed it the last best chance for the world to avert the climate crisis. Biden has started to staff a SCOTUS reform commission, as he promised on the campaign trail, following concerns from Democrats that the Supreme Court is too ideologically conservative and is too powerful. The official census count is expected by the end of April, the Census Bureau announced. This causes a ripple effect in that new political candidates are effectively uncertain of which political districts they're running to represent. Biden also lifted a ban that Trump put in place on transgender people serving in the U.S. military. The president also stopped involuntary discharges against transgender troops already serving, and for the Pentagon to go back in its files to reverse any involuntary discharges put in place already. The Defense and Homeland Security secretaries have to report on their progress to the president in 2 months. Opponents of transgender troops serving in the military claim that the armed forces are paying for sex reassignment surgeries and affect troop morale, but leaders of all 4 military branches have said that there hasn't been any adverse impact in the military. The Russian hack called the SolarWinds hack that breached federal agencies and Fortune 500 companies is deeper than thought, according to investigators, as a third of the victims didn't even run the software that was hacked into. The UN data released this week showed that China overtook the U.S. as the world's leading destination for foreign direct investment, with the U.S. falling 49% in its investment for overseas businesses. Biden's foreign policy team is going to pivot their priorities on stopping a growing China as opposed to constant Middle Eastern skirmishes. President Biden started holding his first calls with foreign leaders, including Russian President Vladimir Putin, who has been a boogeyman in recent years for his role in meddling with the U.S. elections, hacking into U.S. federal agencies, and his detainment of opposition leader Alexei Navalny. The White House said that the call between the two leaders involved extending an arms control treaty, reports of Russian bounties on U.S. troops in Afghanistan, interference in the 2020 presidential election, and releasing Navalny. The Associated Press characterizes Biden's approach to Putin as cautious, as Biden's first priorities aren't likely to confront Russia first. The acting ambassador to the United Nations, Richard Mills, announced in a speech that the Biden administration is resuming American aid to the Palestinians, reversing another Trump policy that bet maximally on supporting the Israeli government in all of its policy aims, including controversial settlements of the West Bank and declaring Jerusalem as Israel's capital. Mills also reaffirmed support for the two-state solution, calling on Israelis and Palestinians to refrain from unilateral actions such as annexation or incitement to violence. The billions of dollars in arms sales meant for Saudi Arabia and the UAE by the Trump administration, counter to Congress's disapproval, will now be frozen, according to Secretary of State Antony Blinken. In the face of Congress's rejection of Trump wanting to sell precision-guided missiles and F-35s to Saudi Arabia and the UAE, the former president declared an emergency in 2019 in order to expedite the sales, exacerbating the problem that the two Middle Eastern countries have sold U.S. weapons to al-Qaeda-linked fighters. The Pakistani Supreme Court acquitted a man that was convicted 18 years ago of the kidnapping and murder of American journalist Daniel Pearl, saying that it will release its reasoning at a later date. There were more developments concerning the Capitol insurrection that President Trump incited 3 weeks ago. The man known as Zip Tie Guy and his mother will remain in custody according to an order issued from the D.C. District Court. 3 weeks after the Capitol insurrection, police chiefs are working on finding the extremist officers within their ranks, since many cops, current or retired, were part of the crowd of terrorists that breached the Capitol. The DOJ Inspector General Michael Horowitz announced in a news release that he'll investigate whether any current or former officials in the department attempted to change the outcome of the 2020 election. 3 sources inside the Capitol Police told CNN that the entire force was debating whether to hold a no-confidence vote against Acting Chief Yogananda Pittman and other top officials for not doing enough to command the situation the day of the insurrection. Major General William Walker, the commander in charge of the D.C. National Guard, claimed that the Pentagon restricted his authority to act ahead of the Capitol insurrection in an interview with the House Appropriations Committee on Tuesday, contributing to the delay in the National Guard response. Ironically, one of the reasons for the need to seek approval for troop movements is due to the National Guard's actions clearing out protesters in D.C. for Trump's photo opportunity in front of a church. The acting Capitol Police Chief Yogananda Pittman formally apologized for the force's security failures in front of the House Appropriations Committee and admitted that the police board denied additional support from the National Guard 2 days before the insurrection, knowing that there were going to be huge numbers of Trump supporters coming to D.C. but underestimating their level of animosity. In the same closed-door hearing that Pittman apologized in, the architect of the Capitol disputed Pittman's claim that the Capitol Police pleaded for an emergency declaration in the middle of the insurrection. Meanwhile, what's Rudy Giuliani up to? The former personal attorney to President Trump and former New York City mayor is a potential witness for Trump's impeachment trial and is constantly coming on New York radio station WABC AM 770 to push conspiracy theories that Trump won the election with conservative commentator Mark Levin. Another Trump sycophant, seeing themselves ostracized from society is Mike Lindell, the CEO of MyPillow, who has been at Trump's side throughout his 4 years as president. Twitter banned Lindell from the social media platform for, quote, repeated violations of our civic integrity policy. After Twitter and Facebook banned many Trump supporters that used the platforms to plan attacks, they flocked to other platforms such as Telegram, a messaging app which now finds itself wondering how to handle the influx of users plotting violence. The woman who is accused of stealing a laptop from Nancy Pelosi's office to sell to the Russian government apparently doesn't have it now, according to her lawyer. Riley June Williams' attorney, federal public defender A.J. Kramer, said that after government searches to Williams' house and car, the laptop hasn't been found and that the allegations were cooked up by a vengeful ex-boyfriend. Williams is proven to have had possession of the laptop, according to pictures Williams herself posted on the site Discord. While it's clear Trump still commands the fealty of the vast majority of the Republican Party even after he incited an insurrection against the government, voter registration information in various states showed that 30,000 Republicans switched their party affiliations. Enrique Tarrio, the leader of the Proud Boys, which claims to fight the political establishment, turned out to be a prolific government informant since his arrest in 2013. The DHS released a bulletin warning of national political terrorism due to the rise of white nationalism and political extremism in the U.S. The pipe bombs that were found at the DNC and RNC are believed to have been placed the night before, according to the FBI, who's still looking for more clues about who placed the bombs there. The Wall Street Journal reported that the rally that preceded the insurrection was funded by elements of the far right, including conspiracy theorist Alex Jones, and a top fundraiser for Trump, Julie Jenkins Fancelli, the heiress to public supermarkets. Earlier reporting also pointed to Trump's former White House staff sponsoring protest petitions for the rallies that preceded the riots. Journalists are still attempting to piece together Trump's pardons that he issued in his last month in office. A Times report showed that out of 240 pardons and commutations, only 25 came through the Department of Justice's Pardon Attorney's Office, which has become the standard process for someone seeking clemency to go through. Others, such as Steve Bannon or Roger Stone or any other of the closest connections to the president, came through personal appeals. Speaking of Steve Bannon, his pardon might bring trouble to his 3 co-defendants in the case alleging fraud taking money from donors for the purpose of building the Mexican wall that Trump promised over his 4 years but couldn't get done. Because Bannon had been pardoned, he can't claim his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination since there's no danger he could be federally convicted and now could be forced to testify against Brian Kolfage, Andrew Badalato, and Timothy Shea. As Biden came into office, he asked Trump's holdouts to either resign or get fired, but it might not be so simple. In Trump's last months, he converted his low-level political appointees as permanent civil service staff, which come with bureaucratic protection. The latest person Biden has pushed out is Trump's former White House physician, Dr. Deshaun Conley, who gave optimistic accounts of Trump's condition when the former president got sick with COVID, despite the reality that Trump suffered serious symptoms and received experimental drugs for treatment. Dr. Kevin O'Connor is replacing Conley. Melania Trump has hired staff and set up a post-White House office with the goal being to continue her Be Best campaign, which stands against online bullying. Trump's last former chief of staff, Mark Meadows, has joined the Conservative Partnership Institute, described as a networking hub for fellow conservatives. A new report by the Government Accountability Office revealed that the Trump administration spent $200 million to send 8,722 ventilators to 43 other countries to address their COVID cases, with U.S. aid giving little input and not being able to track most of the ventilators. An American Sign Language interpreter will now appear at all White House press briefings. Disability activists got excited this week ever since Biden's press secretary Jen Psaki announced there would be an ASL interpreter at press conferences so that the hearing impaired can follow what's going on. Time magazine then reported that the ASL interpreter in question actually has ties to right-wing extremism. Heather Mushaw is part of a conservative group of ASL interpreters that were provided to videos promoting vaccine misinformation, presidential election conspiracists, and the January 6th Capitol insurrection. The first week of Biden's performance as president gave him an approval rating higher than Trump ever enjoyed in all 4 years. 56% of voters approve of Biden's performance, 4 points higher than Trump's peak in March 2017, according to Morning Consult. Some concern has been raised about relatives of White House staffers who are lobbyists or who are otherwise trying to profit off of their relationship with the president. White House counselor Steve Ricchetti's brother is a K Street lobbyist who just had their best quarter yet. Biden's brother used his relationship with the president to promote their law firm in an ad. According to a person with knowledge of the conversation between the president and his younger brother Frank, the president said, "For Christ's sake, watch yourself. Don't get sucked into something that would first of all hurt you." The Inspector General for the Department of Health and Human Services released a report about a part of the agency's budget that the agency has treated as a slush fund for the past 10 years, originally meant for Ebola and the development of cures for other diseases. A whistleblower told the Inspector General that staffers called it the Bank of Barda, named for the office established in the budget. A former FBI lawyer has been spared from prison for changing an email related to the probe into Trump's involvement with Russia's meddling of the 2016 presidential election. Special counsel Robert Mueller led the probe, concluding that although a sitting president couldn't be prosecuted, the president and those around him obstructed justice in the investigation, looking into the president and that Trump welcomed, but didn't personally involve himself in Russia putting the thumb down in favor of his electoral victory against Hillary Clinton. Kevin Kleinsmith was an FBI lawyer that admitted in June 2017 that he sent an altered email to an agent saying former Trump campaign advisor Carter Page wasn't a source for the CIA, which downplayed his prior cooperation with the CIA, which made Page's actions look more suspicious. Trump's second Attorney General, Bill Barr, appointed John Durham as special counsel to investigate the origins of the Mueller probe, which led to only prosecuting Kleinsmith, who, although he missed out on jail, received a 12-month probation sentence. Moving on to Congress, and starting with the House. House Republicans have a Marjorie Taylor Greene problem on their hands. The Georgia freshman that entertains QAnon conspiracy theorists was a prolific Facebook commenter back in the day, including supporting executing prominent Democrats such as Nancy Pelosi, Barack Obama, and Hillary Clinton in 2018 and 2019. Greene was put on the Education Committee by Republican leadership, and following all of Greene's controversial news articles coming out against her, Pelosi slammed the GOP conference by putting Greene there, calling it appalling and that the enemy is within, particularly about certain members of Congress that share the same ideology as right-wing extremists.
I do believe, and I have said this all along, that we will probably need a supplemental for more security for members when the enemy is within the House of Representatives, a threat that members are concerned about in addition to what is happening outside.
The latest Marjorie Taylor Greene conspiracy unearthed by her social media posts is that the California wildfires in 2018 were caused by satellite lasers paid for by George Soros, a Jewish businessman that is the target of alt-right conspiracy theories. Fellow freshman Congresswoman Cori Bush said that she's moving her office away from Greene's after Greene and her staff berated Bush in the hallway while not wearing masks. Greene said that Bush was lying and was berating her instead. A video also arose of Greene walking after school gun violence survivor David Hogg in D.C., claiming that Hogg was a paid actor who helped fake the shooting of Marjorie Douglas High School in Parkland, Florida 3 years ago. Federal authorities arrested Robert Lemke this week, a California resident who threatened to assassinate New York Representative Hakeem Jeffries and a relative of journalist George Stephanopoulos. Jeffries' brother received text messages from Lemke threatening his life. After Liz Cheney voted in favor of impeaching Trump for his role in inciting the Capitol insurrection, she faced backlash from the Arizona Republican Party, and now attention is being paid to how the House Republican leadership is going to handle someone in their party speaking truth to power. Florida Republican Matt Gaetz, known as a vociferous Trump supporter, including saying that Antifa was actually behind the Capitol insurrection, was in Arizona rallying local Republicans in Arizona against Cheney. Joe Kennedy III is starting a new PAC called the Groundwork Project to support grassroots Democratic activists, signaling a new initiative ever since Kennedy lost his Senate race to Senator Markey in Massachusetts. Representative Mondaire Jones said that he's proposing a bill that would get rid of the $10,000 cap on tax deductions related to state and local taxes. Republicans put a cap on the deduction when they passed tax cuts mostly on the wealthy during Trump's term. The cap affects residents of cities like New York City who pay a lot in state and local taxes. In the Senate, an official not authorized to discuss any ongoing investigations told the Associated Press this week that a number of threats were aimed at Congress members as Trump's second impeachment trial ramps up. While Senate Democrats are all ready to convict the former president, a procedural vote put on by Republican Senator Rand Paul on the constitutionality of the impeachment trial showed that all but 5 Republican senators would basically vote to acquit Trump for his role in inciting the January 6th Capitol insurrection, a troubling sign for conviction that will require the support of 17 GOP senators if all Democrats are on board. Brian Jack, Trump's former political director, made phone calls to Republican senators reassuring members that Trump won't start a third party after all, which some senators saw as a threat to their jobs. 5,000 National Guard troops are going to remain in D.C. until mid-March, amid security concerns surrounding the trial, according to Acting Secretary of the Army John Whitley. Since the Constitution mandates the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court to preside only over a sitting president and not a former one, Democratic Senator Patrick Leahy will instead preside over the trial since he serves the constitutional role of President pro tempore, who is considered the President of the Senate, and third in line to the presidency after the VP and Speaker of the House. Senators were already sworn in as jurors, and the question turned to witnesses, in particular who will serve as witnesses, considering the former president himself could be a witness along with several senators who were huddled with other lawmakers during the insurrection. Tim Kaine and Susan Collins are exploring a censured resolution instead of an impeachment conviction after most Republicans voted symbolically against convicting Trump. A censure won't have teeth, and historically hasn't amounted to much. Andrew Jackson was censured by Congress, but all it took was for his party to win control of Congress to reverse it. An email sent by the acting sergeant at arms, Tim Blodgett, said that security traveling with lawmakers has been bolstered and will be placed in airports with Washington's Union Station on busy travel days. Biden's COVID plan is hitting snags in the Senate. A bipartisan group of 16 senators told the director of the White House National Economic Council, Brian Deese, COVID coordinator Jeff Zients, and the head of the White House Legislative Affairs, Louisa Terrell, that stimulus payments should be limited to low-income Americans, requiring a rework of the COVID relief bill. Considering the Republicans' intention of obstruction despite calls for unity, Senate Democrats are ready to pass Biden's COVID bill themselves, turning to a Senate procedure called budget reconciliation that allows them to vote on bills that deal with the government budget with a simple majority vote. The COVID relief bill still contains more than just financial relief to Americans, but also Democratic wish list items like a $15 federal minimum wage. But in the face of Republican opposition, they're introducing a separate bill to do the same thing anyway. The Senate has confirmed some of Biden's cabinet nominees and held hearings for others. The Senate went ahead and confirmed the first female Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, and confirmed Anthony Blinken as Secretary of State. Biden's DHS nominee, Alejandro Mayorkas, has moved out of committee but hasn't been pushed out of the floor just yet. Dr. Rachel Levine, Biden's choice as Assistant Health Secretary and the first transgender nominee, is facing a transphobic smear campaign by prominent members of the right, including Pennsylvania Republican State Senator Jeff Pyle, who posted on Facebook making fun of Levine's appearance. The far-right media outlet Breitbart misgendered the doctor and called her by her birth name, not to change name after her transition. Conservative commentator Ben Shapiro called Dr. Levine a man who believes he's a woman in a tweet. After Democrats Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema promised they wouldn't overturn the legislative filibuster, Republican Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell dropped his demand of a written promise not to get rid of the filibuster in order to share the Senate chamber with Democrats, who hold a one-vote lead through the vice president. It won't be the end for challenging the filibuster, as Senate Democrats are going to quickly realize how easy it is for Republicans to obstruct Democratic priorities, requiring a 60-vote majority, which Democrats don't have. Republican Senator Josh Hawley continues to receive criticism over his conduct surrounding the Capitol insurrection 3 weeks ago, including voting against Biden's Electoral College certification and giving rioters a fist pump in the air before they broke into the Capitol minutes later. Hawley's mentors, including Stanford University Professor Emeritus of History David Kennedy, has disavowed Hawley, and journalists are unearthing his early work, including an article he wrote for his hometown paper, defending militia members from all being called domestic terrorists after the Oklahoma City bombing in 1995. Senate Democrats have filed an ethics complaint against Hawley, which Hawley promptly turned around on them by just filing an ethics complaint against them. Ohio Republican Senator Rob Portman announced he won't run for re-election in 2 years, saying that the current political partisanship makes it impossible to get anything done. Portman has been Senator of Ohio for 10 years. Republican House Representative Jim Jordan said that he wouldn't run to replace Portman in 2 years. Senator Tom Cotton wrote in an op-ed this week that it's time for the National Guard soldiers to head home because their mission is complete, and that they were only meant to protect the inauguration from being attacked. A smaller number of National Guard troops is being kept in the Capitol in order to protect the streets of D.C. in light of ongoing threats by right-wing political extremists. Moving on to the judicial branch. The Supreme Court dismissed 2 cases revolving around the Emoluments Clause designed to prevent presidents from accepting private gifts, seeing it as corruption. The nonprofit Citizens for Responsibility and Ethics and attorneys general from D.C. and Maryland had 2 separate lawsuits against the president, saying Trump violated the clause from getting rich off his businesses while he was president, stemming from his ownership of his hotels that foreign dignitaries stayed out to win Trump's favor. The Supreme Court also refused to take up the case of former New York Democratic Assembly Speaker Sheldon Silver, who was serving a 6.5-year sentence for political corruption. Trump reportedly considered granting clemency for Silver, but ultimately didn't. Dominion Voting Systems, the company that provided voting machine software to some states during the election, is suing Rudy Giuliani for $1.3 billion for defamation claims stemming from what they call demonstrably false allegations about the company's voting machines and their ties to Venezuela, or something like that. Dominion is also suing another Trump lawyer, Sidney Powell, who led the charge to sue battleground states to overturn the 2020 presidential election. Giuliani also used his time spreading false claims to push a membership to an online fraud protection company and dietary supplements, according to Dominion's lawsuit. Judge Drew Tipton of the Southern District of Texas granted a request by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton for a temporary injunction against Biden, pausing Trump's old immigration enforcement of maximum deportation. In order to get what's called a TRO, the party has to convince a judge they would suffer immediate irreparable injury unless the order is issued. Texas became the first state to sue the Biden administration. Paxton argued that the 100-day pause by Biden violated an agreement between Texas and former acting Deputy Secretary of the Department of Homeland Security Ken Cuccinelli that the U.S. wouldn't take up any major changes in immigration enforcement without notifying Texas before 180 days, which Biden's administration challenges legally. A federal judge approved the court-appointed monitor to oversee New York City's compliance with legal orders to make sure special education services actually happen once parents win them through administrative hearings. New York City has problems with implementing hearing decisions within the legal 35-day window, with court documents showing that the city only met the deadline 30% of the time from October 2017 to January 2018. In national news, the U.S. has logged around 26 million COVID cases and around 437,000 deaths. As the nation continues to fight the pandemic and the death count increases, there has been some optimistic news that the rates of hospitalizations are decreasing. Meanwhile, anti-vax activists continue to peddle conspiracy theories, including fabricating deaths caused by the vaccines. The number of people suffering adverse reactions from the vaccines is very small, less than 1% of the total. The world had surpassed 100 million deaths as a result of COVID this week. In Arkansas, Trump's former second press secretary Sarah Huckabee Sanders announced that she's running for governor. In Minnesota, 6 people were killed in a mass murder in Indianapolis, Minnesota, with investigators saying that it was a targeted attack. In Illinois, rebuffing demands by officials in Chicago for teachers to return to the classroom, the Chicago Teachers Union voted by 71% majority to continue teaching remotely. The Chicago Board of Education said that it pushed back the return date in order to resolve the situation with the teachers union. A paper published in the European Geophysical Union's journal Cryosphere concluded that the world's ice is melting faster than ever, pulling on data from a global satellite survey that showed 28 trillion metric tons of ice was lost between 1994 to 2017. The doctors behind the journal said global melting accelerated 65% since the 90s. The energy company ExxonMobil announced that it's going to make changes to its board and take more action to reduce its carbon footprint, according to activist investors D.E. Shaw Group and Engine No. 1 LLC. GameStop and Reddit landed in the headlines together this week for a stock trading frenzy initiated by a subreddit called Wall Street Bets. The forum was angry at a hedge fund for trying to short or betting on stock losses on the falling video game retailer GameStop. The $3 a stock company's value shot up to a high of almost $500 a share, leading trading platforms to cease trading on the stock in order to prevent a massive crash. Further anger was directed at the stock trading apps like Robinhood after they barred individual investors from accessing the GameStop stock, with claims of market manipulation preventing day traders from accessing the stock rather than hedge funds that are usually the ones that short the stock. The chairwoman of the House Financial Services Committee, Maxine Waters, says she's planning to hold hearings on the situation, saying that there's a history of predatory conduct from hedge funds that needs to be addressed. That's it for this week's show on the 25th hour, hoping you beat the 24/7 news cycle every Sunday afternoon. I ask that you please rate, subscribe, and share this podcast with your friends, and don't forget to become a patron today at patreon.com/the25thhournews. As always, you can email your tips and suggestions at the25thhournews@gmail.com. Follow us on most of your social media platforms and spread New York City's soon-to-be top-rated political podcast.